Welcome to Howling with the Wolfe, everyone. Thank you for joining for another episode, final one of 2018. Hope everyone had a happy holiday season. Merry Christmas. New Year is coming up around the corner. And last chance for us to talk football, at least for Dolphins fans, that matters, for this season. In this game, it's questionable whether it even matters. But, there's sort of a bittersweet end to a season. I always get towards the end of the seasons and I'm like, oh man, it's great because it gets a little bit easier. You can take a break a little bit, but also I love football and we're going to be without football after the playoffs, for about 7 months. So bittersweet, but we'll talk about what we have at this point and we'll do a lot of discussions about the Dolphins, kind of put a bow on what we've learned about this team, talk about the topic of change and what we think is going to come out over this next week. I also want to look around the NFL, look ahead to the playoff picture, and who's got the best chance of winning it all. So, as always, thanks for joining. I'm Cameron Wolfe, the Wolf. We're going to do some howling this week. So, as always, fire away on the Q&A chat on the right panel that you see over there. I'll see those throughout the chat. And it'll basically shut me up for a second, and we can talk about whatever you guys want to talk about. So I have some topics I definitely want to get into, and other than that, then we're just gonna wrap. So go ahead and feel free to ask at any time, and I'll get to them and try to get to everybody's questions before we call it a night. So first, I just want to talk about Ryan Tannehill's future and the possibilities that this is his final game as the Dolphins starter. On ESPN.com tomorrow morning, I'm going to have an article having a little bit more in-depth conversation about whether this will be Ryan Tannehill's final game as a Dolphins starter and what does that mean. Interesting enough, Oklahoma practiced at the Dolphins facility after the Dolphins, today, and there was a lot of talk about Kyler Murray, the Oklahoma quarterback who won the Heisman. He said he's going to play baseball. But he mentioned it in his media day press conferences that he loves to have options and that he's still keeping it open. So a part of me thinks that we haven't heard the last of Kyler Murray in football, and if he for some way or reason ends up being in the draft, then it becomes an extremely intriguing prospect for a lot of teams, including the Dolphins, who could be looking for a quarterback if Kyler Murray becomes the name in that hat. So I think there are not as many prospects in this draft as a lot of people want as far as quarterbacks, but there are options. There are options in draft and there are options in free agency, and we're going to talk about some of those throughout these episodes and try to figure out exactly where the Dolphins should move forward. But Ryan Tannehill's future is the first topic, and I think that the thing about Tannehill that people always mention to me when they ask, "Oh, what's the deal with Ryan Tannehill?" Ryan Tannehill is a perfectly capable starting quarterback in the NFL. I don't think that that should be up for debate. I think he's one of the best 32 quarterbacks in the NFL, and I believe that if the Dolphins do get rid of him, whether release, whether release, trade, or whatever, I think he gets a starting job elsewhere. I just think so. I think that he shows too much talent, as Adam Gase always loves to tell us. His biggest issue is staying healthy, and his other biggest issue is that when things break down around him, he doesn't seem to be able to overcome whatever the players and talent that he has on the field. We've seen that over the last few weeks where the offensive line is completely crumbled and you see some of his pocket presence not step up. Offensive coordinator Dow Loggins talked today about the things he likes to see out of his quarterback, the things that make a quarterback elite per se. And he mentioned third downs. He mentioned being able to make plays off schedule. He mentioned being able to make the wild plays per se. And I think I'm a very similar thought process to Dow Loggins in that those are what makes a quarterback special. Yeah, the arm strength's great. Yeah, you love a guy who can, audible and be cerebral and lead, and all those things are great. But for me, give me a quarterback who can make things happen when things are not perfect for him. And I think that's one of my biggest, criticisms with Ryan Tannehill is that he's extremely tough. He can win you games. He can keep you in a playoff hunt. But when things break down, when the offensive line is not perfect, when your receivers aren't getting open, when you're not able to run the ball, too often I don't see him transcend what he has on the field. And I think ultimately if the Dolphins do decide to go away from Ryan Tannehill, that along with his health are going to be the two biggest factors. So if this is Ryan Tannehill's final start coming up Sunday in Buffalo, what does that mean for him? Number one, it means that the Dolphins will have a decision to make coming in March, whether to keep his contract on the roster if they decide to move forward with a drafted quarterback or another free agent, or trade him at that point and try to get the best value from him, probably a mid-round pick at that point. Or they could decide we'll just keep him on the roster a la Joe Flacco and draft a quarterback and let them compete, and maybe Tannehill wins that starting job until he's ready. That's my best. That's the route I would go. I think that we've seen two situations that are very similar that have been successful for teams. We've seen Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes and Alex Smith. Alex Smith was the entrenched starter. There was nothing wrong with him. He just wasn't great. And they were willing to trade up, get Patrick Mahomes, and they started Alex Smith that whole year. Patrick Mahomes got a cameo at the end of the year, and they decided that Patrick Mahomes was their future. They traded away Alex Smith, got a nice bounty of picks from Washington, and then they moved forward with Patrick Mahomes. Then we saw what happened in Baltimore. Joe Flacco was a starter. They drafted Lamar Jackson, last pick of the first round. Lamar Jackson ended up starting about week 10 or week 11 when Joe Flacco got hurt, and he never gave his job back because they love what Lamar Jackson can do. Obviously, Miami had a chance to get Lamar Jackson. We ain't going to talk about that today. They didn't draft him. That was their decision then. They're going to have to live with the consequences. But either way, as they move forward, we've seen examples of teams keeping their starter in Ryan Tannehill at this point and drafting another quarterback and using him as the bridge to the future. Obviously, Ryan Tannehill probably wouldn't be out in love with this idea. He believes that he can be the true answer and still be the future. He said this week that he wants to be Miami Dolphins for life. Just going to be frank, Ryan Tannehill, I don't think that's going to happen. Whether that's this year, next year, or the year after, I think at some point the Dolphins and Ryan Tannehill will have to part ways. So the question is when? And the Dolphins have to make a decision this offseason at their crossroads. Are they going to be content with staying status quo, staying the way they've been doing things? Are they going to take a chance and a chance to be great? And that's the hope that I hope we see out of them, regardless of what happens at head coach or whether they keep Adam Gase or not, whether they keep Mike Tannenbaum or not. What they do as far as a top, I think talent, and particularly at quarterback, is something that needs to be added to this team. And you need to get a long-term vision of what you think this team is going to look like. So that's something that I think is important for the Dolphins this offseason. And I'm intrigued to see how they go about that. It's going to be very, very particularly active offseason, I believe, for the Dolphins as they try to figure out what their future looks like. So that's the Ryan Tannehill topic. I also want to discuss the Dolphins and their myriad of potential changes. There's been a lot of talk about Adam Gase. There's been a lot of talk about Mike Tannenbaum. Not as much talk about Chris Greer. I think that he's safe. But just the whole conversation of who stays and who goes. We're, like we've said plenty of times on this platform, we're not here to call for anyone's job. Matt Burke was questioned quite a bit, earlier, today about him losing his job and the prospects of that. And the coaches, they say they don't think about this, but coaches think about it. They try to keep their head down and try to do as much as they can to not focus on it. But they hear the noise, they hear what's all going on, and their families hear what's going on. So ultimately, we're not going to call for anybody's job here, but I do think that there is going to be some sort of change, whether it's Tannenbaum, whether it's Adam Gase, whether it's Matt Burke, whether it's a combination of them all. I think there is going to be some change in that level of the organization, and I think that there needs to be change for this team to continue to move forward. So that's my initial thoughts on there. I'm going to go ahead and hop to a few of you guys' questions that you have firing away in the chat. If you guys want your question answered, go ahead and fire away, and we'll go ahead and jump to those. So John Murray saying, so last week I mentioned Gesicki moving to receiver. I read today he was doing position drills with the receivers. Yeah, Gesicki actually does position drills with the receivers quite often. They all kind of mix and match together. So I don't think that's something that's new per se. As far as your comment to move him to receiver, I get the understanding because he is a big receiver. A lot of the new modern era tight end is a big receiver. I could see him maybe playing some H-back, The problem with playing him at receiver is that Gesicki struggles to get off press coverage, and he doesn't have the speed to be a receiver on the outside. He's not your prototypical uh, wide receiver. He's built like a tight end, a fast tight end, and that's ultimately where he's going to have his most success. I don't think he's a receiver. I think he would really struggle to separate as a receiver if he's covered with corners. So I think you would have even a worse product on the field, honestly, if you're lining him outside receiver. I think you have to find matchups for him. I think you want to put him in the slot, put him in a hybrid position where he's matching up against linebackers, because that's when you can get him to excel. But right now, this is going to be a challenging offseason for Mike Gesicki. If I'm the tight ends coach, if I'm the Dolphins, I'll tell Mike Gesicki, spend the whole offseason in the weight room. Get stronger. Add some weight to your body. We need you to come back and be more physical than you were this offseason. Too often you got bullied. You got pushed around. It doesn't matter if you're playing receiver, you're playing tight end. If you're getting bullied, you're not going to succeed in this league. So sometimes you need a little wake-up call. And I think for Mike Gesicki, hopefully the Dolphins hope that this year was a wake-up call for him because he didn't succeed in a lot of different areas. And it's not just about him being a good blocker. I don't think he'll ever be a really good blocker on the NFL level. And you don't need to be a really good blocker on the NFL level to be a great tight end or a really good tight end or even just an average tight end. I think you need to be able to handle your own physicality-wise. You have to be able to win your matchups one-on-one. And too often we didn't see that from Mike Gesicki. So that's my comment on him. I think he is one of the most disappointing players for the Dolphins in 2018, and he has to make a big jump to not be a disappointment in 2019 and start using the B word, bust. So definitely it's going to be a mano-a-mano, man-up type offseason for Mike Gesicki. Haddon Gross, hopefully I pronounced that right, said, do you think if Adam Gase returns next season that he'll keep Matt Burke? Okay, going back to what I said earlier, I'm not calling for anybody's job. Matt Burke's a good dude. We talked to him today. But if you're asking my opinion, I do not think Matt Burke is going to be back. Whether Adam Gase is here or not, I think we've seen too much of clashing between what Matt Burke wants and what a lot of the key defensive players want. It doesn't seem like he is being able to produce a product that's able to succeed given their talent on the defensive side of the ball. They're terrible on run defense. They're one of the worst defenses in the league in sacks. They haven't consistently been able to get out the field on third downs. I think that a lot of that is a Matt Burke issue. A lot of that's a player issue. And some of it is that Matt Burke and the players are not being able to gel the way they should be as far as scheme and player fit. So I talked to Matt Burke today, and I asked him about the prospect of what do you do when a player does not fit your scheme? Because it's a very important question for a lot of coaches, because you often have coaches who are married to their scheme, and players who don't fit in it don't succeed. The Dolphins honestly have a lot of bad fits on defense. You've got T.J. McDonald and Rashad Jones, who are two strong safeties who essentially are playing together at safety. You've got Minkah Fitzpatrick, who is a free safety or slot corner, playing a lot of outside corner because of need, one, and two, because he's blocked by Rashad Jones and T.J. McDonald. So there's a lot of different things going on with that area. You've got Kiko Alonso, Raekwon McMillan, and Jerome Baker all trying to mesh together at the linebacker crew. And you've got undersized defensive linemen trying to handle their own against the run. So there are some fit issues, but Matt Burke mentioned today that he gave a good answer about it, and I'm not sure how much of it we've seen this season, but he said that lazy coaching is saying that your scheme is your scheme no matter what, and fitting players to that, which is the right answer. But I think too often we've seen Matt Burke say, hey, this is the way we're going to run things, and we're not running a bad scheme, so our players need to get it together. They need to execute. So I think I would want a little bit more adjustment from my coaching staff, and I think that they're going to need to restart at that defensive coordinator position. So that's my thought on that, Don. J.D. Young is saying, how much of the defensive line is salvageable at this point? Whew. It's going to be hard for you to get a few pieces off that D-line. I mean, okay, let me be positive. Vincent Taylor, who's coming back for an injury, he's going to be an integral piece of that D-line. I think Devon Godchaux is going to be a piece of that D-line that you can build on going forward. Those two at defensive tackle, I don't know if you want both of those as starters. I think that one or both of those guys need to be reserves, but they're young players that can be impact players going forward. And I like those two. So I think those two are salvageable, to answer your question, JD. On the defensive end spot, you got 36-year-old Cam Wake, and Matt Burke kind of raised some eyes today when he talked about Cam Wake's snap count. And he said that essentially Cam Wake's 36 years old, and he decides when he's on the field and when he's not on the field. And we'll ask Cam Wake about that tomorrow. But my perspective of that is that, hey, maybe Cam Wake's age is getting to him. Maybe we're looking at a situation where this is Cam Wake's last season in the Dolphins, whether by his choice or by not. So I think that's a very reasonable possibility, and Cam Wake has been one of, if not the best edge rusher on that line. Robert Quinn has succeeded lately over the last 5 or 6 games, but he has a huge albatross contract, about 10 or 11 million next season, and I'm not sure if the Dolphins are going to be willing to pay for that. So he could be a potential cut bait. If not, he maybe return and he becomes your best edge rusher, which is however you feel about that. He's been hot and cold. Charles Harris, he had a sack last week, but otherwise he's been a disappearance. First round pick in 2017. He's going to come back next year because he was a first round pick, but it's hard for me to say he's salvageable because we haven't got anything out of him. Andre Branch, he's cut. I can imagine by March, whenever the league year is over, I think he's going to be out of here. And there's nothing really. I mean, Jonathan Woodard's a depth guy. Maybe at the end of the rotation, Keem Spence, his contract I believe is going to be up. Maybe you bring him back, but I don't. He's a stopgap guy for me. And then Sly Williams, Ziggy Hid were all end of season pickups. So I don't think any of those guys are guys you count on heading into 2019. So Christina Lambert has a question. Early guess as to who Miami's starting quarterback in 2019 will be. Will he be a rookie in the draft or a free agent trade ad? Very good question, Christina, and that takes me into my next topic. We're actually going to talk about 2019 quarterback options. So I'll go ahead and give my take, and I'll present what the Dolphins' decisions have to be. When you look at where the Dolphins are at this point, it's going to be hard for them to get out of Ryan Tannehill's contract. Not hard per se, but it's not financially feasible. I talked to a former NFL agent and salary cap analyst for CBS, Joel Corey, about this in an article I wrote last month about essentially how the Dolphins restructured Tannehill's contract in March and essentially gave him the wherewithal to stay for 2019. Essentially, they're going to take about a $13 million dead cap number into 2019 if they decide to cut him. In layman terms, that means that they're going to have $13 million on their salary cap that is being taken up essentially by Ryan Tannehill not being on the roster, by them deciding to cut him based on different bonuses and stuff that accelerated into this league year. So that's a heavy amount. They have heavy amount of dead cap from Ndamukong Suh, and it's not typically a conducive way to do business. That being said, if they decide to cut bait with them regardless, that's something they're going to have to take on. If they decide to trade Ryan Tannehill, they're going to take on a good bit of dead cap too. So regardless, there's a lot of money involved with Ryan Tannehill that will play a factor in this decision. That being said, the Dolphins absolutely need to look into getting a new quarterback in 2019, whether as serious competition for Tannehill or ultimately as the QB1. And my early guess is that the Dolphins will bring back Ryan Tannehill and draft a quarterback in the first or second round to compete with him. And this is what I would do. So I'm thinking that, the people in charge are going to have similar logic or based on what I've heard from them recruiting draft prospects heavy, and from the fact that if Adam Gase returns next season, I know that he really likes Ryan Tannehill and he's going to want to win right away. So that option gives you a chance to win with Ryan Tannehill if he proves to be the guy that's more ready to play. And that could be a very real possibility given the quarterbacks in this draft don't seem to be extremely high prospects. And they don't seem to be like the Baker Mayfields or the Patrick Mahomes or the Deshaun Watsons. Maybe you need to sit a guy for a year before he's ready. So I think ultimately that's the best route for the Dolphins to go, and my belief is they go that route. The other option is cutting Tannehill, bringing in another veteran to compete with the rookie, maybe like a Teddy Bridgewater, maybe like a Tyrod Taylor, And then the third option is just trading for a quarterback altogether. Maybe you add a quarterback like a Derek Carr if he becomes available, a Matthew Stafford if he becomes available, Joe Flacco, somebody like that. Those type quarterbacks give you another option. So as I said, I would choose option A. And from that scenario, it would be a rookie along with Tannehill. And, I haven't done a lot of deep diving in the rookies yet, but I will tell you what, I know a lot of talk has been made about, Dwayne Haskins and Drew Lock and Daniel Jones. But I'm going to need somebody to convince me out of Will Grier. I like a quarterback with the it factor. Will Grier may not have the adequate arm strength or size that you want in a quarterback, but too often I've seen him at the it factor, and that's what I like. He has a little bit of Baker Mayfield in there to me, so he doesn't have the arm strength of Baker Mayfield, maybe not the talent, but he kind of reminds me of him out of that Big 12 offense. So I got to see how he does in the combine, how he does throughout. But I think for me, if I'm looking late first round, early second round, Will Grier might be a guy that I'm interested in. Let him learn from Ryan Tannehill. Let him sit back and watch, and whenever he's ready to go, he becomes your starter. So, Christina, hopefully that was a long way to get about your question and who I think the starting quarterback is and sort of the decisions they have to make to get to that point. Catherine Barner is asking, what would you grade Minka Fitzpatrick rookie season? I think that he's done extremely well. I think very few rookies have been asked to do what Minka Fitzpatrick's been asked to do as far as playing outside corner, as far as playing safety, as far as playing slot corner, as far as playing, sort of some nickel linebacker as well. He's had a lot on his plate, and he's ate like he, has been hungry every play. And he's been playing like a savvy veteran. So he's not going to be in Defensive Rookie of the Year hunt because he doesn't have the big splash numbers of interceptions or tackles or whatever. But I think that he has been one of the Dolphins' best defensive players, and he's definitely a core piece to build around. I'm excited about what Minka Fitzpatrick can do over the next few years. And I was talking to him today in the locker room because Bama's playing OU on Saturday, and they're practicing. OU is practicing out here at the Dolphins facility, and he said he's going to see some of his buddies at Alabama down on Miami Beach today. So, he's still got a lot of Alabama pride in him, but ultimately he's a guy who's going to be him and Xavier Howard are going to be something that Dolphins fans can be really excited about going forward. And I think those are two positives to take out of this Dolphins season. If you're asking, what did you learn about the 2018 Dolphins? You learned that you got really good players and Minka Fitzpatrick and Xavier Howard that are going to be core pieces for you going forward. So that's what I think you learned. So, guys, I'm going to go ahead and talk about this game because Adam Gase says this game's important. I'm going to give you real quick a score, a prediction, and do a real quick look around the NFL. If you have any final questions about the Dolphins, about the NFL, about anything, go ahead and fire them away on that chat, and we'll answer them before I head out of here. So, my prediction for this week is Bills 24, Dolphins 13. I'm not necessarily confident that the Dolphins are going to show up in full. I know offensive coordinator Dow Logan said that he believes that, if you've got the right team, they're not going to be able to quit. And I'm not saying this team is a bunch of quitters, but look, you're going up to Buffalo with 30-degree weather, final game of the season, a game ultimately that doesn't matter as far as playoff contention. As much as you tell guys 8-8 sounds a lot better than 7-9, it's going to be tough for guys to come up there with the same motivation, same fight as they may have, a few weeks ago. So that, along with the fact they haven't been playing well at all, Josh Allen has chewed them up on the ground previously. I think that he could do it again. They're not going to have Xavier Howard most likely. They're not going to have T.J. McDonald most likely. They may not have Kiko Alonso. You're playing down defensively against a team that chewed you up and that you didn't play well against offensively as well. So I think there is going to be it's going to be a tough one, and hopefully I'm wrong and we got a really entertaining game in the finale. But I'm not holding my breath. Look around the NFL real briefly. I think I'm very interested in Week 17 games of what happens with a few different teams. First of all, the team I used to cover before that, and if you're a Titans fan and watching me, thank you. You're loyal. Appreciate you showing me love still through that. But the Titans are playing Indianapolis in Nashville. Winner go home game for both of those teams. Chance to win the last wild card spot in the AFC. The Colts obviously the favorite with Andrew Luck. Marcus Mariota's banged up. It's not looking great, for his chances, I guess, to be able to play at 100%. And we're not sure if he's going to play at this point at all. It's going to be really tough for that team, the Titans team, to beat Andrew Luck, a quarterback they haven't beat much of all. In their time together, especially without their starter. So one thing to watch out for is that Titans defense is really, really talented. And I think a lot of people don't really see them because they're in Nashville. A lot of people look over them. But that defense is a top 5 defense in the NFL. So if they can keep it muddy, if they can keep it close, then maybe they got a chance even without Mariota. But I think Andrew Luck in the end may be too much for them to handle. So I'm picking any in that game, but I'm going to definitely watch that and be eager to see what happens. And another side note for Dolphins fans, the winner of that game is a team that the Dolphins are going to travel to play in one of their road games next season. It's the way the schedule works out. You play the second place team in the AFC South on the road and the second place team at the AFC West at home. So it'll probably be the LA Chargers playing in Miami and the Dolphins either playing in Indianapolis or at Tennessee next season. So for travel purposes, I hope Nashville, I live there. It'd be a cool city to visit again. But I'm thinking most likely it'll be another trip to Indy. So another game, the 2 games that are deciding the last spot in the NFC, the Vikings-Bears and the Eagles-Washington. I think the Eagles win that game. The Vikings-Bears game, I'm eager to see how much Matt Nagy and his team are going to play hard because they have an option. If they play hard, if they beat the Vikings, then they knock the Vikings out of the playoffs, and they play the Eagles most likely in the first round of the playoffs. Or they could lay down a little bit because they don't have a ton to play for. They still have an outside chance at a first round bye if the Rams lose to the 49ers. But they can lay down against the Vikings and say, hey, we're going to hide our game plan. If they decide to hide their game plan and don't play hard against the Vikings, then they could potentially play the Vikings again the next week in Chicago for a playoff game. So I'm eager to see the strategy there. Players, coaches always say we're going to play to win, but strategy comes into play there. I hope that all these teams play hard and we just kind of see what the marbles are. So those are a few games I'm looking at. And then one game that may be a low-key game is the Ravens-Cleveland Browns. Baker Mayfield has been balling. He might have stole the Offensive Rookie of the Year with the way he's been balling out. I love him staring down Hugh Jackson. I know all these old school people talking about how that's bad taste or whatever. No, show me that flavor. Show me that energy. Show me that fire. I love that out of my quarterback. So I love to see Baker do that. And I wouldn't be surprised if he pulls off an upset out there against the Ravens, and that would ultimately potentially get the Steelers into the playoffs. So I know they're hoping Baker can give them a late Christmas present. But those are 3 games I'm looking forward to. And then hopefully we get a hot and heated playoff race. The Patriots look wounded. I think there's a chance that we get a new team out of the AFC, whether that's the Chargers, whether that's the Chiefs, whether that's one of the teams get hot like the Ravens or the Colts if they get in. Maybe even the Texans. There's a lot of teams out there. The AFC is wide open. And then in the NFC, you got the Saints and the Rams, who are the 2 juggernauts out there, the 2 teams to beat. I think the Saints are ultimately the team to beat out there. But then you got the Bears. If the Eagles get in, that's going to be fun. The Cowboys obviously in there. I see my boy Dave in there talking about the Cowboys. A lot of teams in the NFC. So I think this playoff race could be fun. And we could see 2 new teams in the Super Bowl, which would be exciting for fans. So I got one last question from Hadan, and we're going to go ahead and call it wraps. Hadan saying, why do you think they rarely look prepared this season on the road? The Dolphins ended up finishing 1-6 on the road. Could be 1-7. They lose in Buffalo. Adam Gase kind of gave a weak response talking about the talent that these other teams have out there, and I just think that's an excuse. I think ultimately, average teams play inconsistent on the road. I compare it to NBA teams. When you watch NBA, and sorry if you guys don't cross over, but I watch NBA basketball. If you watch in the playoffs, the old saying is when you're in the playoffs, your role players ball out at home and they struggle on the road. This Dolphins team is a team full of role players. And when they get on the road, whether it's the noise, whether it's the chemistry, whether it's just their comfort level, whether they don't have the heat behind them, they just don't play well. They end up turning into role players who can't hit their shots. There's not a lot different, but they're just not hitting their shots when they're on the road. So that's my thought about why they've struggled. And the biggest way to fix that is to get consistency. You've got to get a quarterback who can overcome what you've got struggle-wise. You've got to get playmakers on both sides of the ball that can stay healthy throughout the year and make impact plays. And that's what this Dolphins team has been missing. So, as always, thanks, guys. Subscribe to my channel on YouTube. Follow me on this page. Share with your friends. It was really great to do this out throughout 2018. We'll be bringing this back 2019. I think that we're going to have at least one more session to close it out next week. So we'll have a postseason Howling with the Wolf chat, and then we'll be a little bit more sporadic in the off season. Thanks as always. Give me any feedback you guys want, and thanks for watching.